بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم تسليما كثيرا. الحمد لله رب العالمين. اللهم افتح علينا حكمتك وانشر علينا رحمتك يا ذا الجلال والإكرام. First of all, I want to thank the hosts, all of the distinguished professors that are here, this wonderful center of knowledge, which I was made to understand that this is the largest university in Malaysia. This is also a wonderful auditorium to be speaking, and also to see so many young faces out here. It always inspires me to see the young people that are willing to come out to hear a discussion or a lecture or to participate in something of that nature, as opposed to spending their evening watching television, which is what a lot of people tend to do these days. The topic, and I think Dr. Delp spoke very eloquently towards the purpose of the evening. We also prepared some thoughts for an academic audience, and I think there's quite a few students here. So we're going to modify what I was going to talk about a little bit, but the basic idea of the crisis of knowledge is that there are many problems in the world. We have economic problems. Currently we have very serious political problems. One of the problems that we have right now is in Ukraine, which in some ways is a deeply troubling crisis right now, because these are the situations that in the past have very easily led to major conflagrations. People tend to forget that it was the assassination of the heir of the Habsburg Empire that ignited World War I, which led to countless deaths. That it was the German invasion of Poland, which they considered actually to be Lebensraum, or German living room. They were reconquering what they felt to be part of the previous German Empire that was dismantled after World War I. And people tend to forget that World War II was actually a direct result of World War I. And the utter humiliation that the Germans suffered at the hands of the conquering powers at the Treaty of Versailles. So these events led to over 100 million people being killed during the 20th century. But if you actually look at these problems, they were always a failure of the political class at solving problems that were, in essence, not just simply political problems, but deeper than that. And this is part of the trouble that we have, is that we no longer define our terms anymore. We no longer look at these human illnesses that we have at a deep level. We look at them at a very superficial level. And so we have economic problems, but they're addressed at a very superficial level. For instance, the recent massive crisis which Ben Bernanke, who was the head of the Federal Reserve Bank in the United States and did his PhD on the Great Depression, recently came out admitting that the financial crisis of 2008 was greater than the financial crisis of 1929, October 1929, that began the Great Depression. But instead of addressing the problem at the root, instead what was done was to ignore the deep problems of the financial structures and institutions, and to simply bail out the criminals that perpetrated great financial crimes against large numbers of people, not just in the United States, but around the globe. And there were people here in Malaysia that were affected by that crisis. The Irish people were made to bail out banks in mainland Europe that had nothing to do with Ireland, but their political class accepted this. One of the few countries that actually did anything was Iceland, where they put the banksters in jail. So, and they refused to pay the English banks for crimes that were committed against their population by people that were unethical. So instead of addressing the economic problems at a deep philosophical level, which is understanding first and foremost the economic system that you have at its philosophical base, because any institution you has a philosophical understanding. There's a philosophy behind consumerism. There's a philosophy behind capitalism. There's a philosophy behind despotism. And unless you understand the philosophies behind those, when the problems of those institutions arise, you can't address them properly because you don't understand the problem. Any physician knows that etiology and diagnoses go together. You have to understand what caused the disease before you can treat the disease. And you cannot, if somebody comes to you with malaria and you treat them for malaria and then you send them back to the malarial swamp to simply be reinfected again, that is not treating a person. That's not treating the cause. And so looking at a deeper problem is very important. Now, one of the major problems in the crisis of knowledge is that knowledge has been defined by a materialistic, hegemonic civilization that does not acknowledge other forms of knowledge. So, for instance, in our tradition, as well as the tradition that Dr. Delp was trained in, which is the Catholic tradition, in our tradition, our epistemology is very different from the epistemological assumptions of the current dominant model around the globe. But if we don't understand the epistemological assumptions, if we simply go to these universities and we imbibe what's being taught without having the critical skills to understand and analyze these things, then we become victims of worldviews that were engendered by others that do not share the same first principles that we share. If we don't know our first principles, if we don't know what our methodologies are, if we don't know what the epistemology of Islam is, if we don't know how we view truth and what is truth, if we don't know these things, then that ignorance is easily replaced by another type of ignorance, which is a compounded ignorance. It's learning things that are simply wrong. Our scholars differentiated between simple ignorance and between compounded ignorance. Al-Jahl al-Murakkab wal-Jahl al-Basit. Jahl al-Basit is the ignorance that somebody who knows they're ignorant has. And this, Dr. Naqib al-Attas calls it innocent ignorance. It's something that can be remedied. But compounded ignorance is an ignorance where somebody is ignorant and they're also ignorant of their ignorance. And this is a much deeper problem. And so one of the great tragedies of modern human beings, we have a cult film in the United States which is called The Wizard of Oz, which every American child has to see year after year until they're fully indoctrinated into the worldview of The Wizard of Oz. But one of the things about The Wizard of Oz is there's a scarecrow who's looking for a brain. And he says, if I only had a brain with the thoughts I'd be thinking, I could be another Lincoln if I only had a brain. So he's looking for a brain. Well, he never finds the brain, but at the end, the wizard gives him a piece of paper. And he says, in my country back home in Kansas, when somebody doesn't have a brain, we confer upon him a diploma. And this is very often what happens in our universities. Brainless people are given pieces of paper to convince them that they have a brain. But the reality of it is they're actually more ignorant coming out of the university than they were going in. Because when they went into the university, they had innocent ignorance. But by the time they come out of the university, they have this compounded ignorance. And this is to me, one of the great crimes of the modern educational institutions. that people are deprived of a true education. They're given what they think is an education. Educare, to lead out of. You cannot teach people what they don't already know. That learning in our tradition is remembering. It's tadhakkur. It's a recollection of something that we already know. And this is why the Quran says, وَذِكِّرْ, remind. Make them remember what they already knew. What is it that we already knew? We knew a covenant that we took in another dimension. It was a sacred covenant. And it began with, أَلَسْتُ بِرَبِّكُمْ, am I not your Lord? And we replied as spirits, we replied in the affirmative, Bala shahidna. Indeed, you are our Lord, and we witness to this. We're brought into this world, and the world is a place of remembrance. It is to remember a previous existence. It is to recollect, to recall. This is why we call dhikrullah, because we're remembering what we already knew. You cannot remember something that you did not know previously. And this is the highest form of knowledge in our tradition. It is to know your Lord. فَاعْلَمْ أَنَّهُ لَا إِلَهَ إِلَّا اللَّهِ. This is not being taught in the modern institutions of learning. They have completely removed God from academia. They have removed God from the social sciences, they have removed God from the physical sciences, and they have certainly removed God from the ethical traditions that are taught today and inevitably lead for anybody that has an intellect to moral relativism based on how they're taught. So in the Muslim world, we have adopted alien worldviews. These are not the worldviews of our own tradition. They have been given to us by people that have come to certain conclusions about the world. One of them is that the world is purely the material world. It's a quantitative world, and this is why they worship the quantitative sciences over the qualitative sciences. But in the Islamic tradition, while a human being is meant to be literate in both qualitative and quantitative aspects of life, because we are beings of meaning but dimension. We have comprehension and extension. We have quality and we have quantity. And therefore both of them are important. To have literate people, but also to have numerate people is important. And this is why the numerate sciences, the quantitative sciences are important. But our tradition always gave precedent over the qualitative sciences. And the single most important of all these sciences was language. Language. This is what makes us human. What makes us human is that we are articulate beings. We are beings that can communicate. But what is the secret of our communication? When we were told in the Quran, إِنِّي جَاعِلٌ فِي الْأَرْضِ خَلِيفَةً, the angels asked, قالوا وتجعل فيها من يفسد فيها ويسفك الدماء. Will you put in the earth those who sow corruption and shed blood? It's interesting that their question involved corruption and shedding blood, which look around the globe now how widespread these two phenomena are. Corruption and bloodshed. We have corruption, unfortunately, the Muslim countries, the corruption indices that are done in the Scandinavian countries on a yearly basis, the Muslim countries are some of the most corrupt. They are, in fact, considered to be the most corrupt countries in the world. In fact, on average, Nigeria always takes first place. And Pakistan generally comes in second. But I have a Pakistani friend who informed me that the Pakistanis bribed the Nigerians to take first place. So this is a big problem. This is a major problem that we have. Now, the other is the shedding of blood. And so the angels ask this question. This is istifham, it's not i'tirab. They're asking to understand because they were looking at the beings that were on earth before humans, which were the jinn, and this is what the jinn did. The jinn were here before us, and they were corrupt, and they shed blood. And so the human being was put here to replace them. Now, what's interesting about this replacement, the angels said, وَنَحْنُ نُسَبِّحُ بِحَمْدِكَ وَنُقَدِّسُ لَكَ. We praise you and we deem you holy and transcendent beyond any description. That this is what we do. Allah says, قَالَ إِنِّي أَعْلَمُ مَا لَا تَعْلَمُونَ. I know what you do not know. And this is important, that the word that is used is, I know what you do not know. And then the very next thing is, وَعَلَّمَ آدَمَ الْأَسْمَاءِ. And God taught man, Adam, all of the names. This is the secret of the human being. That we have the ability to abstract. We have the ability to see the one in the many. The only way that we can communicate is by seeing the one in the many. When we talk about a lecture, so you knew that there was a lecture tonight. How do you know what a lecture is? How do you know what a lecture is? If I say there's a lecture on the crises of knowledge, how do you know what a crisis is? How do you know what knowledge is? Because you have abstracted the one out of the many. There are many types of crises, but they share common qualities. And that enables us to speak intelligently about the oneness, the unified nature of crises. It enables us to speak about the unified nature of knowledge. We are unifiers by nature. This is what we do as human beings. We are muwahidun. We are constantly making one. And how do we make one? We make one through language. We can only communicate because of the oneness of language. And this is why the ultimate abstraction is to recognize that this diverse creation also has a source. Just as every crisis, we can abstract the essence of a crisis. We can abstract the essence of a crisis out of all these diverse crises. We can also abstract the essence of existence out of all this diversity. And the essence of existence is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is our Lord. He is not creation. He is the creator of creation. But it's through His creation that we know Him. This is the crisis of knowledge. We have failed to see our Lord in His creation. We have failed to see our Lord in this extraordinary theater of manifestation that He has given us to come to know Him in the short time that we tarry here. Muslims are a theocentric civilization. Our lives are meant to revolve around God. We are becoming like other previous civilizations, a narcissistic civilization, a civilization that revolves around me. This is the child civilization. This is the age of the child. We're living in the age of the infant. But this is a tyrannical infant. It's not, because we look at children, we have, in English we talk about, I don't know if you have this distinction in the Malay language, but in English we talk about childlike and childish. Childlike is a very positive quality, but childish is a very negative quality. Because a child has an innocence that we all recognize because it has yet to be tainted by the world. It's a sinless being. But the childish nature is the tyrannical nature of the self. This is nafs al-ammara. This is the nafs, this is the ego that does not share. This is the ego that sees that it is the only thing in existence and everything is peripheral to its own existence. This is what the child needs to be educated out of. This is the essence of education, is to draw the true nature, the true innocence of the child, the bara'at al-asliyah of the child into existence. And this is done, in our tradition, we have no word that corresponds to the word education. There is no word in the history of Islam that corresponds to the English word education. We have two concepts that are always kept together. Tarbiyah with ta'lim. The idea of nurturing and the idea of educating. In other words, you cannot separate the nurturing process from the process of education. And this is why they went together. The murabbi, the mu'addib, the muallim went together. The teacher was a spiritual mentor as well as being an intellectual mentor. You cannot separate the spirit from the intellect, because the intellect in and of itself is a spiritual phenomenon. It is not a material phenomenon. Consciousness is spiritual. The very center of the human being, this core that Allah calls the lub, ulul albab, is a immaterial reality. It is a spiritual reality. And so the murabbi was the one who took you by degrees, who brought you out of yourself. And this is why madrasa in Arabic means the place of effacement. It's the place where the negative qualities are effaced and the positive qualities are inculcated. They called the first stage of education takhliya, the emptying out of the self. And the second stage was tahliya, the adorning of the self with those beautiful qualities. What the ancients called truth, goodness, and beauty. What we call Iman, Islam, and Ihsan. Iman is our truth. There is no God but Allah. Islam is the way that we behave with goodness in the world. And Ihsan is the profound need for the human being to make things beautiful and also to recognize beauty. And this is the human condition. But if you look at the current world today, everywhere you look, there are two powers ruling. There is the irascible power and the concupiscent power. There is the dog soul. This is what Imam al-Ghazali called the dog soul and the pig soul. These are the two powers that are reigning. The people that are consuming and not recognizing that their consumption is killing them, and then the people that are effecting their rage on the world. Literally going out and with rage in the world. The warmongers. The warmongers, whether they're spreading the weapons of war, and we know in our tradition that it's prohibited to sell weapons during times of civil strife. In fiqh, the vast majority of ulama said it's prohibited to sell weapons when people are fighting, because Islam does not encourage fighting. It encourages ending fighting. كُلُّمَا أُوقَدَ نَارًا لِلْحَرْبِ أَطْفَأْهَا اللَّهُ. Every time they raise the flames of fire, God put those flames out. Muslims are supposed to want to put the flames of war out, not to ignite the flames of war. This verse that was recited at the beginning, and it was an interesting choice from Surah At-Tawbah, but this verse that was recited at the beginning is a good example. You see, the Quran says, فَلْيَجِدُ فِيهِمْ غِلْظَةً. You know, the disbelievers will find harshness in these people. This is only during actual fighting. But there are now Muslims that believe that this is simply the way we're supposed to behave with non-Muslims. Whereas the Quran tells us, لَا يَنْهَاكُمْ عَنَ الَّذِينَ لَمْ يُقَاتِلُكُمْ فِي الدِّينِ. That God doesn't prohibit you from showing those who don't oppose you and persecute you religiously, right? أَن تَبَرُّهُمْ وَتُقْسِطُوا إِلَيْهِمْ. That you show righteousness towards them, and that you actually give them a portion of your wealth. This is what Qadi Abu Bakr in his Ahkam al-Quran says. تُقْسِطُوا إِلَيْهِمْ means to be just, but he also says, اجعلوا قسطا من أموالكم. That you can actually help them when they're in need. We just recently, I've been mentioning this for years, but just recently I was glad to see it. There's a Turkish filmmaker that wants to make a film highlighting the fact that in the 1840s, in 1847, the great Ottoman Sultan Abdul Majid sent shiploads of aid to the Irish during the Irish famine, and sent pounds, money to help them. This is this was before the idea of global charity. This was before the idea of actually helping other people. And I would challenge anybody to show me many examples of this in human history, where people are suffering in one place and people in another place find out about it and want to help them out. This is a very modern phenomenon, the idea of aid. But Sultan Abdul Majid, he had an Irish doctor who told him about the suffering of the Irish people during the potato famine. And the Anglo-Saxon people in England were not only not helping them, but in fact, they were actually happy about it because it was removing a problem that they had, which is the Irish problem. If you don't believe me, just read A Modest Proposal by Jonathan Swift to see, although it's a sarcastic piece, it identifies the sentiment of many English about the Irish. So this ship was sent to Ireland, and the English were so bothered by it, they actually prohibited from being allowed to dock in their shores in Ireland. So the English that were controlling Ireland at the time did not want the aid from Turkey to come to the Irish. And so they had to, the Ottomans went down and they snuck it into a southern harbor. And that city today has a plaque reminding people of that fact. That this is mercy. And this is based on a Quranic injunction that human beings, wherever they are, should be helped. Algeria, during the great famine of France at the beginning of the 19th century, the Bey of Algeria sent massive amounts of wheat from Algeria to France to help them because they were suffering, even though they were their enemies at the time. But there's something that transcends the animosity of politics, and that is the necessity for us to reveal our humanity. To be muhsinun, to be people that do beautiful acts of goodness, of kindness. This is the essence of human beings. The Prophet ﷺ was called a mercy to all the worlds. وَمَا أَرْسَلْنَاكَ إِلَّا رَحْمَةً لِلْعَالَمِينَ. We only sent you as a mercy to all the worlds. This is our Prophet. He was a mercy. In fact, you have a brilliant Afghani scholar here, and you're fortunate to have him, Dr. Kamali, who writes extensively on maqasid al-sharia. I had the good fortune of having lunch with him today. But one of the things that he says is the two fundamental maqasid of Islam are rahmah and huda, mercy and guidance. And I would argue that really they can be collapsed into one, because guidance in itself is a mercy. That the reason God has given us guidance is because He's merciful. And the Quran begins, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. It doesn't begin, Bismillah ar-Rahman al-Hadi. It begins, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, to emphasize, using two attributes of mercy, that is the essence of our Lord is mercy. And the essence of His Prophet is mercy. And so Muslims, this is the tarbiyah. Tarbiyah is inculcating mercy. It's taking the child out of its cruelty. It's taking it out of its selfishness into a sharing creature, a creature that wants to serve others instead of be served by others. And then the ta'lim is the huda. So tarbiyah and ta'lim is rahmah and huda. It's mercy and guidance. This is the essence of our tradition. And guidance is something that we cannot live without. And because we're imitative creatures, we imitate what we see. Now we have demons teaching our children. We have demons. If anybody came to your house and knocked on the door, and you opened it up, and they looked like Madonna, or Britney Spears, or any of these people, Russell Brand, you know these people because we're in a global civilization. But if any of them knocked on your door and said, "Excuse me, do you mind if I come inside and just entertain your children for a few hours?" Which mad person would say, "Oh, of course, tafaddal." Even with the wonderful Malay hospitality, you wouldn't do that. You'd say, "Get the hell out of here," and you would slam the door on them. Who does he think he is? Or who does she think he is? And yet, so many of us simply turn on the television and plop these little children in front of this mindless box and literally allow strangers from a whole other civilization with a whole other set of agendas to raise our children. I was once studying the Disney Channel, because Disney Channel is everywhere. And it really struck me as odd that this obsession with spreading your message all over the world, so that Mickey Mouse, which I believe is going to be burned in hell with the other idols, that Mickey Mouse is part of global civilization. A mouse is not exactly something that traditionally we've looked up to. It's not Mickey the lion. You know, people name their children after lions and falcons and eagles, right? A mouse isn't even an orangutan, you know, which is quite a stunning specimen as far as animals go. I mean, I could look at an orangutan all day. It's just so amazing looking. So, but I was doing, and so I looked at some of the cartoon, the artists that they have, and I went to their Facebooks because I wanted to see what type of people these were. One of them had as his profession, defiler of children. And it just struck me as so strange that somebody who was doing cartoons for children would describe themselves as a defiler of children. A defiler is a corrupter. It's somebody that makes something dirty, that makes them unclean. So this is a major problem that we have, is that we're not thinking about what our young people are growing up with. So on the one hand, we have the quwwa al-ghadabiyya, and on the other hand, we have the quwwa al-shahwaniyya. We have the dog soul, which is the anger. So half of our ummah is filled with rage and a desire for vengeance. And then the other half is filled with shahawat, with appetites, concupiscent appetites, spending too much money, going and wasting your money on empty things. In certain Muslim countries, they spend 15 times more on luxury items than the average Westerner. 15 times more a year on luxury items than the average Westerner. What is that? That's a sickness. And that's because they're trapped in their lower self. We haven't risen above these two souls because we have, according to Imam al-Ghazali, we have 4 faculties in our being. 4 faculties. We have the irascible soul, which is the dog soul, the shahwaniya soul, which is the pig soul, and then we have the faculty of justice, which is the balancing faculty, and then the sage soul, or the rational soul. One of the American poets, he said, some say the world will end in fire, some say in ice. From what I've tasted of desire, I hold with those who favor fire. But if it had to perish twice, I think I know enough of hate to say that for destruction, ice is also great and would suffice. He's talking about these two forces in the world of appetite and anger. That the world, we're going to destroy ourselves out of our rage like these revolutionaries that want to tear everything down, or out of our appetites where we're consuming until there's nothing left to be consumed. And this is a crisis because the sage soul, the rational soul, and I'm talking about rational, I'm using this not in a sense of formal logic. I'm talking about the true rational soul that sees essences, that sees first principles, that acknowledges reality, that recognizes beauty and harmony, that sees that behind this is something vast that we cannot comprehend. We can only comprehend it in our incomprehensibility of it. And this is our Lord. This is real rationality. It's irrational to believe that this popped into existence out of nothing. The atheists are the irrational ones, not the believers. They are the truly irrational ones. And their crisis of knowledge should not be our crisis of knowledge, because they no longer believe in anything. Their meaning is determined by each individual. This is their meaning. And this is why they can have wealth and fame, and yet they take their lives. Even in our suffering, we don't take our lives, because we believe in our suffering that there is something spiritual about suffering. We believe that suffering is redemptive. This is our belief. It's takfir al-dhunub. It is to remove our sins. And there will be people that have great suffering before they die. And our Prophet ﷺ had hasarat al-maut. He experienced the pangs of death, and actually said on his deathbed, the pangs of death are intense. So even the best of creation was not spared the pangs of death, because this is the transition from this world to the next world. So this is important for us to keep in mind. In conclusion, I would say that if we don't seriously address the crises in our ummah, the current crises of knowledge in our ummah, and recognize that metaphysics has been lost in our ummah, seeing the deeper causes of things, that we will be trapped in the economic causes, the political causes, and fail to recognize the deep spiritual causes that are at the root of the human condition. If we don't address the spiritual crises, which is, it's an intellectual crisis, because the intellect, as I said, is a spiritual organ. It's not a material organ. It's not a physical organ. When it looks at intelligibles, it's called aql. When it looks at spiritual realities, it's called ruh or sir. But these are all synonyms for the same reality, which is a spiritual reality. If we don't address this deep-seated problem and recognize that the faculty of balance has been lost, that we need to restore this balance of our triune souls, that we have intellect and we have emotions and we have appetites. If these aren't working harmoniously in the proper order, then we either perish in fire or we perish in ice. Jazakumullah khairan wa salam. I think it's one of the testimonies to your culture that you can ask open questions. Because in most places I'm used to them being written on paper because they always get worried about some nutcase getting up. But there's so much adab in the Malaysian culture that it's really nice that people kind of understand that people aren't going to do that here. So God bless you.
Please.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Very good evening, Shaykh Hamza, Yusuf, distinguished academicians, brothers and sisters. My question, Shaykh Hamza, I think there's a growing realization of the issues that you mentioned. I think it's pretty clear that we are Muslims, especially even in Malaysia, we are trapped by key concepts imposed by a dominant civilization. In addition, we have among us trapped with an internal problem. We are trapped with political activism. We want to establish the Islamic State. We want to establish hudud very quickly. But I think more profoundly is that deeply rooted in our souls among Muslims is the problem of the inability to acknowledge the lights that Allah has given us from the past and present. What is your advice, Shaykh Hamza?
I mean, there were quite a few concepts that you just threw out there, but just to address two of them. One of them is this desire for an Islamic State, because my argument is that what we need is an Islamic state of mind. I think this whole fantasy about Islamic states that are going to solve all of our problems is a type of utopian ideology that is very alien to the Islamic tradition. It comes out of Marxism, this idea somehow that the state can fix everything. And I think it's very dangerous. Also, the word state in English is from status, which means what stays the same. Whereas in Arabic, the word for state is dawla, which means what's always changing. تِلْكَ الْأَيَّامُ نُدَاوِلُهَا بَيْنَ النَّاسِ. And the word that came, it was used by the Abbasids. They're the first ones to use it because they called their state a dawlatul mubarakah, the blessed revolution. Because dawla meant, in their meaning, it would mean what we would call today a revolution, because they overthrew the Umayyad dynasty. What is noted in Islamic history is that the dynasties that lasted longer were always the most tolerant. This is a fact of Islamic history. If you look at intolerant dynasties, they never last more than 3 generations, which is what Ibn Khaldun argues in the Muqaddimah. Whereas the Ottomans are the single longest lasting human dynasty that we have in all of human history. And they were the most tolerant pre-modern civilization ever to grace the earth. And this is an undeniable fact of life that even the likes of Bernard Lewis will acknowledge. It's only very recently that the Europeans have adopted a multiculturalism that they're actually starting to get fed up with. And so you're seeing a rise of these right-wing fanatics in Europe. And the right-wing fanatics always show up when economic conditions get bad. because they have simple solutions. And when you don't have trained intellects, when you don't have sound leadership, demagogues always fill the vacuum and use very simplistic slogans. I mean, the devil's the greatest ad man that ever existed. You know, the devil, he throws slogans out every couple minutes. You know, he's just a master of sloganeering. Concepts, though, are difficult, you know. So what I would argue is that the Quranic model is that the social conditions are outside of what some social scientists call one's sphere of influence. So, you know, some people describe the world as being made up of a sphere of concern and a sphere of influence. The sphere of influence is what you can actually change or impact. The sphere of concern, like I'm concerned about the Ukraine. I'm concerned about it. But as far as influence goes, I have no influence over Putin other than I could pray that God gets rid of people like that, you know, and would hope maybe that my prayers might have some validity. But it's a concern of mine, but I just don't have influence. But my sphere of influence is what I can actually change. And Allah says in the Quran, إِنَّ اللَّهَ لَا يُغَيِّرُ مَا بِقَوْمٍ حَتَّى يُغَيِّرُ مَا بِأَنفُسِهِمْ. God does not change the conditions of a people. مَا بِقَوْمٍ. What is with the people, their conditions. God does not change the conditions of a people until they change themselves. And so what that clearly articulates is that the transformation of social conditions is a divine function. But the transformation of the individual condition is the human function. So we are meant to transform ourselves. When you get a critical mass of people that are engaged in that activity, then the social conditions change. But when you don't have that critical mass, it doesn't change. We should still be working on ourselves. But the extension of that work should continue until you reach a critical mass and the society begins to change. This is called the Amr Takwini and Taklifi. Some of the theologians divide the affair into Takwini, what God, the conditions that He creates, and then what He has made you responsible for. God has not made the individuals in this room responsible for the levels of corruption in Malaysia or lack thereof. But He's made you responsible for how you transact with others. And that's where the change occurs. So when individuals begin to take it upon themselves, and that spreads, then you get the social changes that are desired. And this is beautifully articulated by Mahatma Gandhi, who happened to be best friends with a very profound commentator of the Quran. And in fact, Gandhi was surrounded by Muslims. And these Muslims were brilliant people that he was surrounded by. People like Sir Abdullah Sahwawardi and Khan Abdul Ghaffur, and who's called the Gandhi of the frontier, a great Pathan non-violent activist. And Abul Kalam, Maulana Abul Kalam Azad, who Gandhi said about him, his peers are Socrates and Aristotle. Gandhi said that we have to be the change that we want to see in the world. And this is where activism for me fails. We had a very famous activist in the United States that was famous for every position. I mean, Palestinian position, civil rights, and a writer of many books who was sued by his wife for divorce for domestic violence. You know, and this is a real problem. One of our great philosophers, Ralph Waldo Emerson, said he hears these people clamoring about slavery in the Barbados, and then he looks at how they treat their neighbors, and it's horrific. So this is about sphere of influence and sphere of concern, that too often we're worried about hudud. Hudud is the smallest chapter of fiqh. It's the smallest one. I've studied several different books of fiqh with teachers. It's the smallest chapter. The biggest chapter is prayer. The next biggest chapter is marriage laws. The next biggest chapter is commercial laws. If you want to implement Sharia, start working on your prayer. Start working on your families. Start working on creating more fair trade in the world with better conditions for workers, more just and honorable. These are the real issues, not severing hands and implementing these hudud punishments that people seem to be obsessed with. It's said in 800 years that the Ottomans never severed a hand. They always found excuses to get the person off. And this was the tradition of our fuqaha. In fact, fornication, our fuqaha talked about the fact that if a woman becomes pregnant and she's not married, that the fuqaha said to find some excuse for her. Because if we implemented that had punishment, then that would mean that we would have to implement it on Sayyidina Maryam, who got pregnant without a husband. So they said to ask her, were you swimming where men had been swimming? In other words, that there could have been some semen that got, or did you go to the hammam after the men were there and use a towel? They tried to find ways to get out. Now people, they want to find ways to implement these punishments. What's wrong with people? It's sickness. It's really sickness. So that, that to me is very important about that. And then, the issue about these terms and knowledge, I think what's very important is to recognize how hegemonic the global civilization is, but also how destructive it is. It's destroying itself. It's collapsing under the weight of its own complexity. And what you have to recognize is Malaysia, God's given you many, many blessings. Among the most important blessings is that your families are still relatively integral. Families are problems. If you want to read the chapter in the Quran that deals with family, it's the chapter of Joseph, number 12, Surah Yusuf. In that chapter, the brothers throw him into a well and try to get rid of him. So families, even prophetic families, have problems. Don't think, all families are meant to function the way they're supposed to function. No. Part of a family is the dysfunctional nature of families. But at the end of Joseph's chapter, he forgives his family. And that's part of the process of life, is that you have to forgive your families. But you have family. I'm living in a country, and Dr. Delp can confirm this. We're living in a country where marriage is disappearing. In fact, the only people that want to get married are same-sex couples. The heterosexual people aren't getting married anymore. They're just living together. So, this is a crisis in the United States. We have children that are born without knowing their fathers. This is a sin against a child. And it's selfishness from the person that is taking sperm from a bank, from an anonymous donor, and implanting it in their womb, or however they do it, and then a child coming into the world that doesn't know its father. We recently had a case where this psychopath had actually sent his sperm. He was working at one of these anonymous donor places, and he had sent his sperm to all these people who had actually put their own sperm in the place. And this girl found it out from a DNA test. And they found out that this guy was just a sick lab technician who was disseminating, and he turned out he was a pedophile and a felon. And this poor girl was on CNN saying, I don't know who I am anymore. She was 18 years old. And she thought that her father was the one living in the home because they did an in vitro fertilization. They weren't able to get pregnant, so they did it outside. But her DNA was replaced by this psychopath. We had 2 people in England that fell in love instantly. Literally, they were at college together. When they went to get the blood test, they found that they were brother and sister, that they had actually been from the same donor, and they were almost going to get married. This is madness. So we're in serious trouble. My civilization is in serious trouble, which means your civilization is in serious trouble, because you're heavily influenced by my civilization. But you have your own civilization, and you need to reestablish your own truths and your own traditions. You're independent people. You have your culture. You have your civilization. So that's my advice to you, is see what you have. It's very precious. I'm telling you, we've lost much of what you have. We had it not that long ago. We had families. We were born in an age where, thank God, we know who our fathers were, because our parents were honorable people that actually married our mothers. So he has the name of his father, which is Delp, and I have the name of my father, which is Hansen. But there are many people that don't have that anymore.
Okay, now let's listen to the second person. Um, hold on, that lady, please. First.
Assalamu alaikum. My name is Shazrina. Welcome to Malaysia, to Professor Delp and Shaykh Hamza. Just a brief comment on your observation about the importance of, or rather the obsession with hudud. I think that in Malaysia, political Islam is focused on hudud as a means of, as a form of repentance, sort of, as a kind of compensation for the collective guilt of everything that's happened to our civilization, as you put it. But my question is actually directed to both of you. It's regarding the importance of academia and institution in the education, or rather re-education of young minds, or any mind really. What are the challenges that both of you have faced in teaching these people to unlearn and relearn, rather unlearn the modernistic work ethic, as Professor Delp put it, the kind of obsession with reinventing the wheel, and focusing them towards a philosophy or a tradition that isn't a reaction to capitalism or socialism or any of the other ideologies that we already have, but rather a tradition and a philosophy that exists unto itself.
Thank you. Just about the first comment, which I appreciate that. But I want to say two things about that. One is that we tend to forget that traditionally tawbah, just simply between the person that offended God and God, is acceptable. We believe that tawbah, a sincere tawbah, is acceptable, and we're told not to despair. La ta'asu min rawhillah, never despair of the grace of God. And that in the Shafi'i madhab, there is an opinion that tawbah, if a person makes a sincere tawbah, that the had punishment is actually suspended from that person. And we know that the Prophet ﷺ, when people came to him to confess their sins, because nobody in Medina was punished by accusation. They were punished because of confession. But the woman that confessed to him that she had committed adultery, he turned away from her 4 times. He didn't want to hear it. And she insisted. And then he said, "Are you with child?" And she said, "Yes." He said, "Go and give birth and then suckle the child for 2 years." So that's 3 years. And had she not come back to him, I know he wouldn't have sought her out. I know that in my heart of hearts. But she came back because she wanted that tawbah. She wanted that certainty. When she was actually punished for that, one of the Sahabas said something bad about her, and the Prophet said, "Don't speak of that woman. If her blood was spread over this city, it would be enough for the tawbah of the entire city." Another man came to Abu Bakr and confessed adultery. And he said, "Have you told anybody?" And he said, "No." He said, "Go home." And it was still bothering him, so he went to Omar. And he confessed to Omar, and Omar said, "Have you told anybody?" He said, "Abu Bakr." And he said, "What did he say?" He said, "Go home. Make tawbah." And he said, "Well, then do what he said." And he sent him away. And then the man finally went to the Prophet ﷺ, and again the Prophet didn't want to hear it. So this is my point, is that these people were... Sayyidina Umar, Abu Bakr al-Tartushi, in his book, he said that Sayyidina Umar caught a man stealing once. And the man said, "Wallahi, it's my first time." He said, "You're a liar, that Allah doesn't expose you on your first time." And then he said to him, "Did you steal? Say no." And the man said no. And he said, "Get out of here. Innaka dharif, you're a clever man, get out of here." Abu Bakr al-Tartushi says, he asked him and then he said, "Say no," to get him out of the lie. Because he was commanding him to say no. But he said, when he said, "You're an intelligent man," in other words, he said, "You're not going to do this again. Go and sin no more." So that was my point about that. But I appreciate the comment. On the second thing, I mean, I would say I agree with Dr. Delp, what he said. But I would say it's very important that we empty out, you know, the kenosis or the takhliyah, that we have to empty our minds. You know, the Egyptians have a nice phrase, "Khalli barak min nafsika," empty your mind of yourself. I mean, they literally mean they figuratively mean watch out, but literally it means empty your mind of yourself. And so we're full of ourselves. It's part of the problem of modern man. We are full of ourselves. You know, in American English, you say he's full of it. But and that means, you know, I mean, they're talking about that he's full of crap. But we also say he's full of himself. He's so full of himself, you know. So it's very important that we have to learn to empty, and this is done through working on ourselves. And then the other thing is actually learning language, because true education cannot come without language. And language is of two types: qualitative language, which is what we call language of words, and then quantitative language, which is the language of numbers. Both are symbolic, both are symbols, but they're separate types of knowing, knowing quality and knowing quantity. And so learning how to read is a very challenging process. Most people cannot read above a 5th or a 6th grade level. So even educated people, many university people cannot read. Even some professors at universities don't read above a 5th or a 6th grade level. It's simply a fact of life. So it's important to learn how to read, the art of reading. Because it's through Iqra, Bismi Rabbika alladhi khalaq. I teach a book by Mortimer Adler called How to Read a Book, which one day I was reading it and my 10-year-old said, "That is the most ridiculous title I've ever heard." And I said, "Why?" And he said, "Because if you didn't know how to read it, you wouldn't be reading it." So that's the clarity of a child. Anyway, one of the types of reading that Adler failed to recognize was devotional reading. He does not have a chapter on devotional reading, which is a very important type of reading. So there are different types of reading. We read for pleasure, for leisure, but all reading should in some way, even pleasurable reading, should be for edification ultimately. We read great literature and we should be edified by it. The stories that the poets tell, and I mean even poets of fiction like Don Quixote, Cervantes' great novel, or Dostoevsky. These are poets also. But there's great wisdom in these narratives. So that's what I would say is really important, is restoring the centrality of language and also the centrality of logic. Our tradition is a tradition committed to intellect, and this has unfortunately been lost. If there were two books that I would recommend every modern Muslim to read, one of them would be Sayyid Naqib al-Attas's book on secularism, and the other, which talks about the crises of knowledge. And you have I considered Sayyid Naqib al-Attas, he's a Malaysian treasure. I really believe that, and I believe that he's really one of the truly great intellects alive today on the planet, and he's really the main reason I came back to Malaysia, was I wanted to see him. So, but he wrote a very profound book, I think, identifying the fundamental problem in the Muslim world, which is loss of adab, and loss of adab is the loss of recognizing hierarchy in the world, putting things in their proper place, which is the loss of justice. And he focuses on adul amanati ila ahliha. وَإِذَا حَكَّمْتُمْ بَيْنَ النَّاسِ أَنْ تَعْدِلُوا, you know, that you should give the trust to the people of trust, and when you judge between people, judge with justice. So that's very important to do that. The second book is a book by John Walbridge, which is called The Caliphate of Reason, which is a very important book because he clearly makes an argument that the Mu'tazilite position died out, but the Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah were completely committed to the centrality of intellect. And although they were not Mu'tazilite, they were very much committed to the development of the intellect and the necessity of the intellect to interpret revelation. And this is what they called aql and naql. Aql is intellect, naql is the revelation, the tradition, the hadith. And I call the people that use naql without aql, naql heads. And we have far too many of them right now in the Muslim world, too many naql heads, and not enough people using the intellect to understand the naql. And this is what Fakhruddin al-Razi in Mafatih al-Ghaib, a great 13th century Mufassir called, he said that in the Quran, in Ayat al-Nur, it's Nurun ala Nur, it's Wahyun ala al-Aqal. It's revelation on the intellect. That light upon light is the light of revelation on the light of intellect. When you have the light of revelation without intellect, it's a blinding light. It's not a guiding light. It blinds people. And they do heinous things because they're blinded. When a person's blind and they're behind a wheel of a car, they will cause immense damage. And that's why the light of revelation without intellect is a blinding light. It's not a guiding light.
Thank you very much. Okay, let's try to take two questions. I still have not heard people at least introducing themselves yet. So if you don't mind, okay, brother. You take two questions. Okay. This one, yeah, okay, try. Yeah, this one seems to be working well.
Oh, the 3D effect.
Hello. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. My name is Abdul Halim bin Abdul Manaf. I'm from Kelana Jaya. I'm an engineer and also a family man. Okay, quick question. Basically, I think the crisis of knowledge, we as a family man, actually a small entity that I think that could probably help if we correct our family in terms of the bringing up of the children in order to address the bigger global thing. And through the advertisement, I should say, or by IKIM, where they mentioned that Shaykh Hamza Yusuf sort of like practice the Islamic way of life in the US through, I mean, so is it possible, maybe you can share with some of us, like, that we can use that module within just a small group of us, a family, because right now, as you mentioned, right, the children are easily influenced. I mean, I have kids. I have 5 kids. You know, they're like Generation Y or Generation Z or something like that, where they are like mainly like tabs, notebooks. You know, especially my daughter, like 6 years old. She will, like, when we come back from home, she would just grab the cell phone and just want to play with like YouTubes and all that kind of stuff, right? So kind of like since you have practiced such way where, I mean, that could possibly share that could probably help in addressing the global crisis for knowledge. I think from the root of it, starting from the bottom rather than just going to the global. That's my personal view. If Shaykh Hamza Yusuf could answer that question.
Okay, sister, please. Can you come up and say your question, please?
Assalamualaikum. My name is Muni binti Wan Muhammad Noor, and I'm a tutor from University Putra Malaysia. I also have a question for Shaykh Hamza Yusuf. It's regarding another crisis in Malaysia, with regards to the understanding and implementation of human rights. Nowadays, even though we are a majority Muslim country and we used to be conservative, there is a shift as of late, whereby we can see that even though there has been incidences of nude parties at public beaches and semi-nude photos being taken in the public streets of Malaysia, amongst the very recent examples, the society of Malaysia today are becoming more and more acceptable of these kinds of acts, saying that it's their right and it doesn't harm anybody. So my question to you, Shaykh Hamza, what is your answer or suggestion to a nation such as ours, which is so obsessed with enforcing human rights, but perhaps using the wrong conception of human rights? Thank you.
Bismillah. Those are both really important and interesting, and actually we really would have to be here all night to address that second one, because it's such a complicated issue. About the first one, I would say I wholeheartedly agree with you. I mean, my personal belief increasingly is that the real crisis on the planet is how we raise children. And Nietzsche, that great moral philosopher, Nietzsche said, I'm saying that tongue-in-cheek, Nietzsche said that we replicate ourselves. And so the dysfunctionalities of this generation are passed on to the next generation. So the Palestinian crisis is now in its fourth iteration, and it's horrible because the sins of the fathers are passed on to the sons. So how do we break these cycles? We have to do it first and foremost individually. In my own experience, there were certain things at a certain point in my raising my children, I began to see tapes that I had from my childhood. And I realized that they really weren't the best tapes to be giving to my children. So things I heard from my parents, I found myself saying. And so breaking those things and trying to get to and I mean, my parents were well-intentioned and good people and did many things right, and like myself, got some things wrong. But it's very important to inculcate empathy. If I was going to say that there was one single quality that should be inculcated in a child, it's the quality of empathy. This is what makes us human. This is what makes the possibility for civilizations, is actually that we feel the pain of others. If we only feel our own pain, then we're narcissistic sociopaths. And we think that other people are simply appendages for our own existence. And I think narcissism is becoming a global problem. The selfie, to me, is the ultimate expression of narcissistic behavior. Anybody that wants to take a picture of themselves, it's like people that admire themselves in mirrors. The reason that you should look in a mirror is to see what's wrong with you. Yeah. If you're looking in the mirror to admire yourself, you're in serious trouble. And our Prophet said, "Al-mu'min mir'atul mu'min." The believer is a mirror of his believer. In other words, he shows him his faults, either because of exemplary character, which leads him to feel that I should be much better than I actually am because this person's so good, and they see themselves in that person, or through sincere counsel or advice, like telling them. And I know the Malay culture is a culture of politeness, but with our close friends, we have to be honest with them, because that's part of what true friendship is. It's nasiha. It's giving them good advice about things. So that's very important. In terms of the technology in the house is a major problem. I believe that the house is your Darul Islam, and that you should try to implement the hudud in your house, not the hudud of the penal code, but the tilka hudud Allah. The limits that God has set for us in our behavior, they should be implemented in our homes. And we should try to implement the compassion of the Prophet with our children. He was very compassionate with children. Anas, who was a young boy that served him, Anas said, he never once said to me in all the years I served him, if I did something wrong, why did you do that? And if I didn't do something, in other words, sins of omission and commission, he never said, why didn't you do that, or why did you do that? He was a very gentle human being, and he treated people with great gentleness. So it's important to remember that we need to inculcate prophetic character as much as possible towards our children. We need to provide alternatives for them. The beauty of children is that if you give them even the simplest things, they're content with them. So if you raise them on these toys and gadgets, you will accustomize them to things that are actually quite harmful for them. And these games are very dangerous because they create attention deficit disorder. There's PlayStation USA. There's many books that have been written on this. The Evil Eye. You can read the Scientific America's study on the addictive nature of television. Also some of the studies that have been done on the thinner corpus callosums on children that grow up with television, that it actually alters the brain. People that watch a lot of pornography, neuroplasticity now will rewire their brain. So people that are watching pornography on a regular basis they have different brains than other people, and they have obsessional thoughts. And they begin to objectify women. It creates deterioration of family. And over a long period of time, about 10 years of pornography watching leads to impotence, and this has been proven. That actually men will eventually become impotent from watching this because the arousal factor is no longer functioning anymore. So these are real problems that people aren't willing to think about or study and address. In terms of the second problem, and I'll try to be as short, even though it's a really complicated problem, the Amr bil Ma'ruf and Nahi Anil Munkar is part of our tradition. But to change things physically is in the hands of the government. It's not in the hands of the people. To change things with your tongue, you can do that if you know the ruling. If you're certain that something's prohibited and you're not going to create more harm. This is a condition, that it doesn't lead to a greater tribulation. And dhann al-ifada, that you think there's benefit in it. So if there's not going to be any benefit in it, then you shouldn't do it either. I mean, there's a khilaf about that one. They say that dhann al-ifada you can even do it if there's no benefit. But in this day and age, I would argue that it's probably better, if you don't think there's any benefit in it, just to keep your mouth shut, because we've got road rage, we've got sick people, there's a lot of mental illness, there's people on psychotropic drugs, there's all kinds of problems. So the government should do that. I think it's important that you have a'raf in your country. Modesty is one of your customs. And those things need to be encouraged in people. And I would hate to see you lose those things. And it saddens me that you're telling me these things. But this is part of the modern world. We live in a global culture. The internet has opened up Pandora's box. And so the evils of the internet have spread everywhere. But desensitization is a reality. And people do become desensitized. Madonna actually said in Advocate magazine, which is a gay magazine, in an interview that she did for that magazine, which is a homosexual magazine in the United States, she said that one of the reasons that she kisses girls in public on stage is because she wants people to get used to seeing this. They might initially be disgusted by it, but she said, but it also might excite them, and eventually they'll see it as a normal thing. So these are people that are literally, they have agendas. They're advocating social change, and it's not for traditional values. She ended one of her songs with the three of them singing at the Grammys. She ended it by saying, "We're bored of the concept of right and wrong." We're bored of the concept of right and wrong. So these people are moral relativists. They don't believe, they're actually amoral, or immoral and amoral. They don't believe in moral concepts of right and wrong. They believe in the concept of do what thou wilt. And this is one of the first teachings of the prophets. If you have no shame, do whatever you want. Our prophet said that. إِن لَمْ تَسْتَحِي فَاصْنَعْ مَا شِئْتَ. And so part of the modern culture is to remove shame or modesty from people. And our prophet said every religion has a characteristic. And the characteristic of my religion is modesty. And children are modest by nature. They're not shameless. And you're a shame-based, anthropologically, the Malay culture is traditionally a shame-based culture. So it's important that you don't lose that. Because once you lose shame, everything goes with it. Jazakumullah khairan. Please forgive me if I didn't mean to offend anybody. I'm just come here with sincere love for your people and your civilization. And I love the tolerance of the Malay people. I love the fact that the Christians feel comfortable here. The Hindus feel comfortable. The Chinese feel comfortable. This is Islam, is that other people should feel comfortable. And there are places now where these people no longer feel comfortable with Muslims, and this is a tragedy of our time. And it's shameful for the Muslims, for the people of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, who taught us to show respect and give people the entitlement of human dignity. Jazakumullah khairan.
Thank you very much. Okay, let's see if there's any more question. I think we try to do it. Okay, we take the last two questions. Okay, this is a blinding light, I think, so I can't really see.
Assalamualaikum. Can you hear me?
Okay. All right
then. Assalamualaikum. My name is Nick Ahmad Haris bin Nick Muhammad Pena. Currently a student in University of Manchester, and once was a student in UiTM as well. My question would be, well, let me present the case of scenario first. Well, knowledge was once known as the liberator from slavery. It actually gave us light, but no more. Since even the institutions where knowledge should be disseminated is being corrupted to be an institution to produce slaves, to provide employment. So I would like to ask for your advice humbly, because I think this is the reason why we tend to become a slave from time to time. Can you please provide us the remedy for us as a ummah, as a general, and what can I do as an individual? Thank you very much. Assalamualaikum.
There's another one.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum.
Okay, at the top there. All right.
Yeah. My name is Abdullah Latas. Okay, my question is, previously knowledge was considered as when someone seeking knowledge, we look at for the source and the purpose of the knowledge. Now, at the modern age, it's coming as an influence. That knowledge is influenced as whether we want to seek knowledge for certain purpose of influence, or that knowledge is being influenced by other people. So people will argue because of changing time, that's why we should change instead of source and purpose to influence. Previously, when, for example, the hadith, we're looking at the hadith, the source of the hadith, who are said the hadith, the narration of the hadith. But now we are looking at the knowledge as a tool to fulfill our life, or to give us our bread and butter. So, I mean, I hope from your comments to give us how we should perceive knowledge. Should we look at it from the source and the purpose, or as an influence to live our life? Thank you.
Okay, this will be the last question for this evening, please.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh, ya Shaykh. I have no question, I have a request for Shaykh Hamza Yusuf. Can he please give a small explanation, a small discourse on the relation between love, knowledge, and sallallahu alaihi wasallam? Thank you. Do you want me to repeat that, Shaykh?
Yes, the last three. Love, knowledge.
The relationship between love, knowledge, and sallallahu alaihi wasallam.
Yeah, I'd like you to chip in on the second one. You know, the first question is about freeing your mind. The liberal arts are the arts that free you. That's what their purpose traditionally was. In the West, they're called the liberal arts. In the Muslim world, they were called the ulum al-ala, which are the instrumental arts, because they were the instrumental arts that enabled you to use your mind in the most effective way, which would be the way that you were most free to use it. Because when you master something, it gives you a freedom. Somebody who masters a musical instrument has the freedom to play it in a way that somebody that has not. Somebody who masters an athletic skill has a freedom. And in the same way, the intellect the tools of the intellect can be mastered, or at least acquired to a level of expertise that enables you to think freely, true freedom. And then we also, identifying freedom and slavery, these are terms that they really need definitions. You know, define something is to give it limits. So when we say slavery, we're really using it metaphorically here, because slavery is human bondage. And so mental slavery is when the mind would be under a type of bondage. And that bondage places you in an intellectual prison, or a moral prison also. So intellectual freedom is what is acquired through freeing the intellect through these skills, these knowledges. And the most important is grammar and knowing how language works so that we can communicate properly. And then logic, because grammar is essentially all grammar is logical. It follows logical rules. Or time, yesterday, tomorrow, up, down, sleep, happy. If I start just throwing words out there without any syntactical structure, they lose meaning. And so by the very nature of language, we are rational. Language is logical. But logic teaches you the grammar of thought. It teaches you how thought works and prevents you from making, just as language grammar prevents you from making grammatical mistakes using a pronoun or a misplaced modifier or having syntactical structures that are ambiguous. It teaches you how to speak properly so that people can understand you. Logic teaches you how to think properly so that you can either analyze arguments being made to you that might be persuasive if you don't know the tricks of argumentation, or to argue persuasively. And so logic is the art of truth. It's the attempt to reach the truth. And then rhetoric traditionally taught you how to speak and argue in the most eloquent and beautiful way, because we're beauty makers. So again, it's truth, it's goodness, truth, goodness, and beauty. Logic is the pursuit of truth. Goodness is essentialized in language. It's the great good that God has given human beings to communicate. And then beauty is the art of articulating with rhetoric to make language ornamented and beautiful, so it's pleasing to the ear and has an effect on the heart. So that's important. And then the quantitative skills also free the mind to be able to work in the world in ways that enable us to enhance human societies through technology, which are practical arts, and agriculture and engineering and all these amazing gifts that we've been given. In terms of how do we perceive knowledge, I mean, I would say that again, you need to define knowledge. And knowledge, traditionally by Muslim scholars, is when what you believe corresponds with reality. That there's a correspondence between what you think about something and what that thing actually is. So knowledge is the arrival of meaning in the mind. What Sayyidina Qibr Ata said. It's understanding things. And traditionally, the great virtues of the intellect, of the speculative intellect, were science, understanding, science, and wisdom. Understanding is this apprehension of first principles that we have, that we intuit, that we know immediately, and this is closest to the divine understanding, because it's simply knowing without acquiring knowledge. And then you have science, which is ilm, which can be taught and transmitted. And then you have wisdom, which is the interaction between understanding and science, which enables you to do the right things in the right time or to understand the highest truths. So these are things that traditionally were understood very well in our cultures and were inculcated in our young people. So, and then you have ma'rifah, which is a different type of knowing, which is the ladunni knowledge. We had husuli and huduri knowledge traditionally. So ilm al-wahbi wa ilm al-kasbi. I mean, there are many terms that are used for these things. And then finally, and I love the last question, the relationship between love, knowledge, and the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Well, the first thing is that he loved knowledge, and the Prophet, his main function is that he is the beloved of God. He's Habibullah. And he loved God with all his heart, and his entire being he was Khalilullah, the khulla, the permutation of love throughout his entire being. And he also loved knowledge. And this is why his revelation begins with Iqra bismi rabbika alladhi khalaq. read in the name of your Lord who created, that this is the reading that we do. It's for the sake of God and for the love of God and for the love of knowledge. So knowledge and love are profoundly related. And the Prophet ﷺ, he was, the only thing that he is asked in the Quran to ask for increase is knowledge. قُلْ رَبِّ زِدْنِي عِلْمًا. قُلْ رَبِّ زِدْنِي عِلْمًا. Say, increase me in knowledge. Allah could have said, قُلْ رَبِّ زِدْنِي إِيمَانًا. Increase me in faith, and that would be a good thing. Increase me in tawakkulan, and that would be a good thing, in trust. Increase me in good deeds. He could have said many, many things, but the one thing that he was asked to ask for increase for is knowledge. Nothing else in the Quran. He asked for many things. The du'as in the Quran are many. You know, there's du'as about أَفْرِغْ عَلَيْنَا صَبْرًا, and give us patience and these things. But the increase, the ziyada, was in knowledge. And because knowledge is the foundation. This is why Imam al-Ghazali, in his genius, began his ihya, giving life to the sciences of religion. Ihya Ulumuddin, he began it with Kitab al-Ilm. He didn't begin it with the book of Iman. The book of Aqidah is the second book. The first book is the book of knowledge, because this is where transformation has to first take place in our understanding. This is the beginning of the journey, is to rectify our understanding. And Allahu Alam. Do you want to add to that? You know, I just want to add one thing that Dr. Delp, the quote that he gave about touch and about sensitivity and knowing and knowledge. That the Quran, when it says, وَإِذَا قِيلَ لَهُمْ لَا تُفْسِدُوا فِي الْأَرْضِ قَالَ إِنَّمَا نَحْنُ مُصْلِحُونَ. And when it said to them, don't sow corruption in the earth, they say, no, we're only setting things right. That says, أَلَا إِنَّهُمْ هُمُ الْمُفْسِدُونَ وَلَكِنْ لَا يَشْعُرُونَ. Indeed, they are the corruptors, but they don't sense it. And the word that it's used is sha'ara, literally means to sense the hair on your skin. So it's a very subtle knowing. And this is why people sow corruption, because they lose sensitivity. They lose this sense of touch, of being in touch with reality. And this is what we need to regain, is we need to get back in touch with reality. Jazakumullah khairan.
Shaykh Hamza Yusuf.